You have been told that your empathy is a heavy burden, a passive curse that forces you to feel too much in a world that feels too little. It is time to destroy that myth. Your sensitivity is not a vulnerability. It is a ruthless, high-definition data-gathering tool. Empathy is the rare ability to read the source code of another person's mind. But until you learn how to weaponize this insight, you will remain trapped in a cycle of endless exhaustion. Right now, you are caught in the trap of direct confrontation. Whether it is a loud boss in the office or a toxic partner at home, you keep trying to out-argue aggressive narcissists. But if you try to out-yell them again tonight, you are guaranteed to lose by tomorrow morning. The brute force approach guarantees defeat because it plays directly into their psychological strengths. Every time you explain yourself, you are just bleeding vital energy against a brick wall. There is a different way, a strategy hidden in the annals of ancient myth and the depth psychology of Carl Jung. We are going to explore the archetype of the magician. This is the art of bypassing the enemy's psychological firewall entirely. By the end of this journey, you will understand how to orchestrate circumstances so perfectly that the adversary's own inflated ego does the heavy lifting for you, dismantling their reality without you ever raising your voice. We begin on the ancient blood-soaked shores of Troy. After a brutal 10-year siege that decimated armies, the Greeks have seemingly vanished. They leave behind nothing but an immense, silent wooden horse standing on the beach. The Trojans, exhausted but intoxicated by their perceived victory, drag this massive structure through their own impenetrable gates. They are celebrating a triumph, completely unaware that they are actively inviting their own annihilation into the city. This epic historical event is not just a myth. It is the ultimate blueprint of a psychological blind spot. The Greeks realized early on that brute force could never breach the massive walls of Troy. So they changed the rules of engagement. They orchestrated a scenario where they stopped fighting the stone walls and instead allowed the Trojans' own inflated pride to do the work of destroying the city. In the analytical psychology of Carl Jung, those impenetrable walls of Troy represent the ego, the rigid, defensive structure we build to protect ourselves from the outside world. The ego is incredibly strong against direct frontal assaults, but it is notoriously blind to its own arrogance. The more fortified the ego is, the larger its blind spots become, creating a fatal vulnerability to anyone who knows how to exploit it. The wooden horse was not a physical gift. It was a psychological projection. Odysseus, embodying the ancient archetype of the magician, understood exactly what the Trojans wanted. They desperately craved a monument to their own invincibility. Odysseus did not defeat them with swords. He simply provided the mirror for their fatal hubris. He gave their ego exactly what it demanded, and they tore down their own defenses to get it. This ancient strategy is playing out in your life right now. The aggressive personalities you face are fortified cities, and you are exhausted from battering against their gates. We must ask a critical question to shift your paradigm. Why did the most heavily fortified city in the ancient world voluntarily drag its own destruction through its gates? And how is your current adversary making the exact same mistake? The answer to that question bridges the ancient ash of Troy directly to the psychological battles of your modern life. We move from the bloody sands of antiquity into a dimly lit, quiet study. Here we decode the myth. The historical arrogance of the Trojans is perfectly mirrored by the aggressive, loud adversaries you face today in 2026. Whether it is a dominating boss or a toxic relative, Their absolute arrogance is not a shield. It is the exact mechanism you can use to dismantle them. Carl Jung identified the magician as one of the primary archetypes of human transformation. This archetype operates on a fundamentally different frequency than the warrior. The warrior relies on brute force, volume, and direct conflict, which inevitably leads to exhaustion. The magician, however, alters reality through hidden knowledge. They do not fight. They master the invisible dynamics of the unconscious mind to orchestrate an inevitable outcome. An unevolved, victimized empath walks into a hostile room, absorbs the toxic energy, and immediately drowns in it. But the magician empath operates differently. You read the room not to suffer, but to identify the collective shadow, the unacknowledged fears, insecurities, and desperate desires of the people attacking you. Once you see their shadow, you can maneuver entirely outside their line of sight. To defeat a loud, narcissistic adversary, you must strictly adhere to one rule: never attack their ego directly. A direct attack, an argument, or a defensive justification immediately triggers their psychological firewall. They want you to fight them because conflict validates their power. If you argue, you are just another Greek soldier dying fruitlessly against the walls of Troy. Instead, you must locate their personal Trojan horse. You must find the specific validation, the exact flavor of praise or perceived dominance that they crave so desperately they will bypass their own security systems to get it. You do not tear down their walls. You offer them the exact projection they need to feel invincible. And then you watch as they drag their own downfall through the gates. The magician understands that human pride is a deeply predictable algorithm. When you stop reacting emotionally and start observing clinically, the mechanics of their manipulation become transparent. You realize that their aggression is just a loud cover for a desperate psychological hunger. But to master this alchemy, we must see it executed in reality. We must step out of theory and into a high-stakes, modern environment. Let us take this ancient strategy into the brutal, hyper-competitive reality of 2026. You are no longer in a study. You are inside a sleek, high-rise boardroom in Silicon Valley. The tension is thick enough to choke on. Julian sits quietly at the end of a long glass table. Opposite him are three aggressive venture capitalists attempting a hostile takeover of his company. They're interrupting him, raising their voices, physically dominating the space. Julian can feel his imposter syndrome flaring, the familiar urge to either shrink away or yell back defensively. But instead of fighting, he executes the magician's protocol. He leans back, subtly feeds their grandiosity, and watches them begin to overplay their hand. This brings us to a terrifyingly counterintuitive question. Why is allowing your enemy to feel completely dominant the most lethal strategic move you can possibly make? Because Julian is deploying a devastating psychological mechanism known in Jungian analysis as mirroring the projection. These investors desperately need to view Julian as weak and submissive to validate their own inflated sense of superiority. Instead of resisting this projection, Julian calmly adopts it. By actively reflecting their inflated self-image back to them, he effectively lowers their defensive skepticism to absolute zero. This is not just philosophy, it is hard neurobiology. When an aggressive personality genuinely believes they have entirely dominated you, their brain rewards them with a massive surge of dopamine. This chemical rush feels euphoric, but it comes with a fatal biological cost. The dopamine flood significantly impairs their prefrontal cortex, the specific region of the brain responsible for critical thinking, impulse control, and accurate risk assessment. If you have ever exhausted yourself trying to out-argue a narcissist, only to end up feeling insane while they remain untouched, hit the like button right now. You are not alone. And subscribe to the channel, because we're going to teach you how to stop fighting and start letting them defeat themselves. By offering no resistance, Julian has intoxicated his adversaries with their own arrogance. They are now blind, convinced they have won. The magician empath understands a fundamental truth that the warrior does not. Silence, stillness, and perceived submission are not signs of weakness. They are the calculated, psychological void into which the adversary will inevitably stumble, lose their balance, and reveal the fatal flaw in their own strategy. The investors, drunk on dopamine and unchallenged dominance, present terms that are legally sloppy and arrogant. Julian, whose prefrontal cortex is calm and fully functional, quietly spots the loophole that will secure his company's sovereignty. He provided the wooden horse, and they dragged it inside. But this dynamic is not limited to corporate boardrooms. What happens when we apply this exact same alchemy to the toxic dynamics of your own family? To answer that, we leave the boardroom and enter a cramped suburban dining room. The air is thick with the forced cheerfulness of a tense family holiday. Chloe is trapped at the table. Her mother, an overbearing narcissistic presence, launches a biting, passive-aggressive comment about Chloe's career in front of the entire family. The entire room holds its breath, waiting for the inevitable. Historically, Chloe would explode. She would snap back in defensive anger, desperately trying to justify her choices, inadvertently fueling her mother's victim complex and ruining the dinner. But tonight, she does not take the bait. Instead of fighting the insult, Chloe smiles gently. She executes the magician's strategy, creating a jarring cognitive dissonance. How exactly does agreeing with an insult instantly neutralize the psychological poison of the attacker? Toxic family systems operate on a rigid script. Carl Jung described this dynamic as participation mystique, a deeply unconscious, tangled psychological enmeshment where every individual plays a predetermined role to keep the dysfunction perfectly balanced. The mother requires Chloe to play the role of the defensive, explosive rebel so that the mother can safely maintain her position as the righteous, long-suffering matriarch. The passive-aggressive insult is never about Chloe's actual career. It is a desperate projection of the mother's own deep-seated shadow, her terrifying, unacknowledged fear of irrelevance and loss of control over her adult daughter. The insult is a hook, demanding that Chloe pull back. But when Chloe refuses to play the rebel, she instantly breaks the entire circuit of emotional supply. Instead of fighting the accusation, Chloe calmly validates the underlying emotion. She responds with a quiet, radical acceptance, acknowledging her mother's anxiety without defending her own life choices. By doing this, the magician empath completely removes the invisible wall the adversary was so furiously pushing against. And what happens when you push against a wall that suddenly vanishes? Without that resistance to hold her up, the attacker falls forward. The mother's script entirely short-circuits. Deprived of the expected conflict, her unprovoked hostility is suddenly left entirely exposed in the middle of the dining room. She becomes disoriented, stammering, suddenly the target of the awkward silence she tried to inflict on her daughter. Chloe did not have to win an argument. She simply altered the reality of the room. This is the profound power of psychological Aikido. You use the adversary's own momentum to unbalance them, protecting your peace without shedding a single drop of emotional blood. However, this level of psychological control carries a terrifying risk. We must now leave the dining room and return to the ancient ruins to confront the devastating dark side of the magician archetype. The smoke is rising from the desolate ruins of Troy. The Greeks won the war, achieving total dominance, but history and myth tell us that their journey home was cursed by the gods, a direct punishment for their absolute lack of mercy and restraint in victory. This ancient ash serves as a grim warning. We fade back to the quiet study, shifting from the triumph of strategy to a stark warning about the cost of psychological manipulation. When you realize how easy it is to bypass the ego and dismantle someone's reality, you unlock a terrifying potential. This brings us to a crucial existential question. Why does mastering the minds of others put you at the absolute highest risk of losing your own soul? Carl Jung warned of a severe psychological hazard called archetypal inflation. This occurs when a human being forgets their limitations and identifies so completely with a powerful archetype that it entirely consumes their personality. When you successfully deploy these tactics, you begin to feel like a god among mortals. You start to view other human beings not as complex individuals with their own pain, but merely as predictable pawns on your chessboard. If you use this profound empathy purely for selfish extraction, to win arguments or assert dominance just for the thrill of control, the archetype corrupts. The magician rapidly degenerates into the trickster. The trickster is a chaotic, sociopathic shadow figure. It plays games with reality simply because it can, lacking any moral compass or deeper purpose. It is a parasite that ultimately destroys the very reality it originally sought to control. When you operate as the trickster, you are no longer protecting your peace. You have become the exact predator you initially sought to defeat. You trigger the psychological law of enantiodromia. This law dictates that an extreme abundance of any one force will inevitably and violently swing into its exact opposite. An extreme abundance of manipulative control over others will always collapse into absolute isolation and crippling internal paranoia. You will win every argument, but you will never trust another human being again. You will constantly analyze every interaction, assuming everyone else is running the same dark script that you are. The walls of Troy you tore down in others will simply be rebuilt around your own heart, thicker and more impenetrable than before. To avoid this fate, we must understand the final, crucial evolution of this power. To escape the fate of the trickster, we leave the cursed ashes of Troy and return to the modern world, where the battle has already been won. Julian sits at the glass table, calmly signing the finalized contract that secures his company's sovereignty. In the suburbs, Chloe quietly clears the dinner plates, breathing easily in a house that used to suffocate her. They have survived. This is the moment the ancient book is closed, and we must ask the final question. What is the profound, functional difference between a manipulator who breaks minds for sport and an ethical alchemist who heals reality? The answer lies in the ultimate direction of your intent. A manipulator alters reality to destroy others. The true magician empath alters reality solely to protect the sanctity of their own self. For years you were told that your sensitivity was a tragic flaw. But now you understand that you possess a rare, profound psychological instrument. Your empathy allows you to see the invisible architecture of human pain, fear, and desire. It is a high-definition radar that reads the unsaid and the hidden. This is not a curse to be medicated away. When integrated with your own shadow, it is the ultimate strategic advantage in a chaotic world. You no longer have to batter your head against the impenetrable walls of someone else's ego. You know how to locate the Trojan horse. You know how to provide the mirror that allows an aggressive adversary to defeat themselves. But the true victory is what you do with the peace you secure. You use this knowledge to build an inner citadel, a quiet, sovereign space that cannot be breached by the loud, frantic noise of the modern crowd. The transformation is complete. You have moved from a victim drowning in the emotions of others to a sovereign architect. You no longer react blindly to the shadow. You observe it, you anticipate it, and you maneuver gracefully around it. You stop being a passive casualty of circumstance and become the silent, unbreakable master of your own fate. If you are ready to claim this archetype, do not just let the video end. Anchor your new identity right now. Go into the comments and write the exact affirmation. I observe the illusion, but I am the architect of my reality. Let this be your public vow that you will no longer fight useless wars, but will instead orchestrate your own absolute freedom. The ancient Greeks knew that the greatest victories are won not with louder screams, but with deeper strategy. Your empathy has evolved from an open wound into an impenetrable shield. Guard your inner citadel, wield your insight with profound ethics, and never forget that true power lies in the unseen. Stay strong.